whereas sex is, I guess, in your society, very real, very like tangible. But like violence on that scale is more like, look what
tangible
this person,
for some people.
Look what this person did in this era that we will never get to see again, and in this country that we are not a part of, but we can watch on the news. And
exactly.
so it's more like a fantasy like realm that they're exploring because it's not in their society as much. Right. It's not like I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna see a mass killing right now.
Right.
So for them, I think that's why you're seeing it in your class, especially creative writing. That's a genre that is like getting pushed out in the public a lot.
Right.
I do think. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Discourse Debrief. I'm joined by
Peyton,
Blossom,
and our special guest,
Ted,
the person who runs our internship and our debate coach for Regents Cup. And today's topic is going to be Peyton's. After some deliberation between Blossom and Peyton, so
can I say very quickly? I'm really glad that you acknowledged that I was the coach of the Regents Cup, because when I listened to the podcast 2 weeks ago, I felt like the passive voice was used one too many times. There was a lot of like, I really liked the coaching, and like, I think that the coaching really like did a lot of like really helped us a lot. And like, the coaching, huh? That's interesting.
Well, sorry to discredit you like
really
that.
great coaching. Was, I wonder who was that person?
Well, it was great.
Dr.
coach.
D.
Yeah, the goat.
Well, I was going to say, you have achieved honorary GOAT status.
Honorary GOAT is crazy.
Ooh, wow.
Well,
That is a participation medal.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
All right.
Peyton, do you have
Well,
some
like, definitionally,
Oh, Lord.
the only way there
Intuitively.
can be two GOATs is if there are two categories.
There's actually many goats.
How can you be the greatest of all time?
That's my goat. All
Please
right.
introduce your topic.
Okay, we should, well, actually, first, do you want to like give us a brief introduction about yourself, Ted?
Sure. It's in the context of how I know you guys. I mean, I run the Discourse series, which oversees this and our No Need to Argue podcast. And I bring in really promising, smart, intelligent students each year, each semester to
And
try
Peyton.
and make sure that we have a well-oiled machine, and we certainly do this year. I mean, we have a really cool community, a real cool group. We have a family, yeah.
And you're an author too, right? Is that?
Oh, Lord.
Oh, well,
Subtle.
yeah. So I teach creative writing at the university. So I have my MFA in creative writing. So I have my second book's coming out next year. And yes, I assume that's relevant.
He's trying to get you to plug
Yeah,
your
I was
book.
trying to get you to plug your book.
Oh, is that what you're trying to? Oh, I mean,
it's also might be relevant.
it doesn't come out till next spring, so it's there's really stuff to plug. But my second book is coming out next year. It's a collection of short stories called Empty Calories and Male Curiosity.
Amen. Well, author, yappers, our topic
Oh, Lord.
is it's a fun one. It's always been fun, kind of core to the American identity.
Stop edging the topic. Just tell us what it is.
What should the limits on free speech be, if there are any at all?
Contention
Oh.
one.
So first, let's just kind of go around. We'll start with you, Robert. What is free speech when you hear that term? What does that mean to you?
I probably don't have as esoteric of an answer to this as you do. I think that it's implied by the name free speech. It's the ability to say what you want to say.
Well, like with your mouth, or like writing, or like legally? Like you can still kind of ground it,
With your mouth.
I mean, when we talk about free speech in an American context, because apparently you want the Robert show, it comes with the connotation of the First Amendment, right? And free speech in that also includes freedom of expression, freedom of press. So yeah, it's not just talking with your mouth. It's writing things down, publishing things, stuff like that as well. Drawing, protesting.
Yeah. Blossom, did you want to alter or substantiate any of his claims there?
I mean,
Substantiate.
it would depend if you're asking me if I believe that there is free speech, or if you're asking me the definition of free speech. But if it's the definition, then I agree with Robert. Yeah.
Okay. Ted, any difference or?
I mean, this is going to be the annoying answer, which is that it depends on the context, right? I mean, it's I think in an academic context, and a legal context, and a social context. I think free speech an artistic one. Free speech means different things. I feel like I'll save the remainder of my thoughts for when you get to the core of what you're talking about, because there's some interesting sort of literature on this subject, but yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll say
the literature.
I'll say it depends on the context.
Yeah.
What about you, Peyton?
I agree with all of you. I just wanted to take that burden off of myself.
Because in the last episode, I noticed that you asked a lot of questions, but you didn't answer a single one of the questions that you asked. So I'm not going to let you get away with that.
Robert, did you notice that, or did your girlfriend notice it for
I
you?
noticed that. I think some things too sometimes.
Okay.
I think a lot of things, but I don't know anything. But for here, I'm a little more confident talking about it.
I know only that I know nothing.
But free speech, like what you just said, I may not have liked that. It may have hurt my feelings, but you may have the legal or social permission to have said what you just said, right? Mm-hmm. Now, there are lots of cool, nifty things we can do with speech, right? We know it well. Well, everybody knows it well, but us in particular, a certain kind of it, right, for debating or storytelling. You with being an author. There are different ways you can gear it, different contexts, right? But, I mean, let's just yes or no go around in a circle. Should there be limits on utterly free speech, yes or no?
Yeah.
Oh.
Who's setting the limit?
You. Like your, I don't know, ideal.
In your perfect world.
Yeah, perfect world. Or, well, no, perfect world, you wouldn't need it.
Yeah, in a perfect world, we wouldn't need limits on free speech. But since we don't live in a perfect world,
Maybe.
I want to say yes, but I know that the people who will have the power to limit free speech are not the people who should.
Yes. Okay. For you. Should there be limits on free speech?
Not only should there be, there by necessity are, and I would argue that in a perfect world, there are limits on free speech. I don't. My utopia does not include utterly free speech without any kind of restraints.
Yeah. No, I also agree. Although when we get into what those restrictions should be versus what they are, I'm a little naive when it comes to trusting context and individuals.
Contexts.
I think my restrictions would probably be lighter than most of y'all's. I don't know, but maybe I'm just in a very privileged position to where like things don't hurt me very much, and so I don't know. I feel like I can trust more people to kind of, how do I say this? Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. That's on me.
Choo-choo.
I thought you were the MC of today's.
I just picked
questions.
the topic and then I ask a.
Sorry, you go ahead.
I have a question actually for you, Peyton,
Yeah.
because when you say should there be utterly free speech, obviously in this country in particular, we've never had utterly free speech, even since the founding.
Sure.
I mean, there's always been restrictions on speech.
Of course, yeah.
And it's never been interpreted that the right to free speech or any of your rights really are unlimited.
Sure.
That's like the whole point.
Social contract.
Yeah. But when you ask, like, do you think there should be utterly free speech? Are you saying, do you think there should be restrictions beyond speech, beyond what we have now? Or are you asking, like, should we get rid of the restrictions we have now?
I guess I didn't think too hardly about that. Like hate speech, like
Bad, right?
bad, but how do we define something as hate speech? Like, if it's like in a close group of friends and we're saying something for the sake of absurdity, and we all know firsthand that we're not like racist or sexist or whatever, not to say that I would ever say something like that, but should that be like illegal to do if we know contextually within that circle, all of us, that it's not causing harm and that it's not actually perpetuating anything like that? That's
So-
like, what are the limits?
So if I could say, my answer when I said, I think we by definition need restraints. I don't look at that. What I mean is what probably we all just assume is meant. Like I'm not saying, oh, we have to look out for hate speech and we have to look out for offensive speech, et cetera. Like Stanley Fish, who's a famous academic from You know this guy?
No, I was just
He has this book called "There's No Such Thing as Free Speech," and it's a good thing too. And his whole basic argument is that we all, like, by definition, put, just linguistically, put restraints on our speech, right? In order for you to understand the sentence I'm saying, I have to put constraints on the speech that, I have to have, a subject and a verb. Like, I have to be able to put my words in an order that you understand, right? And he sort of starts from there and goes, okay, so since we're not all just, speaking by going, like that we've decided that letters make a word and words make a sentence, and we're able to sort of understand language in that way, that then there is obviously a limit that we've all collectively agreed on. And then we go, okay, so then where do we go from there? Obviously, if the point of speech is communication, that you need to understand what it is that I'm saying, his whole entire point is that the complaint that a lot of these quote unquote free speech purists often have, which is, get out of your little bubble, you snowflake, because blah, 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 or whatever. You need to listen to contrasting ideas. That actually, like, his whole argument is that if we were to have completely uninhibited speech, what we would have is no one communicating with anyone, and we would just retreat into our bubbles of, I'm only speaking in the language that the people who I'm going to be talking to anyway understand. The whole entire point of restraints on speech, like that, even if it's self-restraint, is trying to make sure that you're crossing that line, right? So that, I think, is a sort of fascinating way of looking at it. And it's one that I think doesn't usually get brought up in this, because it usually this conversation goes straight to, the snowflakes versus the whatever. And I just think that that's a way more boring conversation, and it's actually really not the accurate one that usually is had. So I'll throw that out as my kind of springboard for what you guys think.
That framing kind of puts me back on my train tracks a little bit. When I asked this question, when I thought of this topic, I was personally thinking more morally, because I'm not as interested in the law. Like, laws change all the time. We have a president who's doing all kinds of fun things with or around the law. But I was thinking it
said
morally.
MS-13 on his fingers. Oh my Lord!
I guess that's kind of to justify where my framework is coming from, but I want to hear more from you two.
Sorry.
Oh, no.
I guess I'll just go fuck myself.
God, this is not looking too good for the moderating. I gotta lock in.
I don't know, because there's a difference. It kind of points to what Ted was talking about, because there's a difference between legally constructed limits and societally constructed limits. I know a big thing for you is contextual humor and being pro context. If you're in a group of friends, does it really matter? Societally, there's a reason why we don't say those words. There's a reason why you're only saying them in your private group of friends. So I don't know if the law in particular should be stopping you from saying certain things. But I feel like the reason that you don't say certain things in public, you should look at why you feel comfortable saying those jokes that you were well, I'm not racist. This is just a racist joke. Why you feel comfortable saying that in a group of 3 of your friends and not in public.
How often are y'all telling racist jokes with your friends? That this is
not that often.
A consistent concern. This is, I don't know if I want to be on this podcast.
To kind of answer your question, it's because I know and trust that us saying that in that isolated context won't hurt anybody. Whereas in a broader societal setting, I can't know that because I don't know or trust people.
Well, to broaden it, so Ted doesn't think that we're just making racist jokes with our friends. I think that what I'm getting at is that you don't know someone's intentions. You know what you're saying, you know what you believe, but just because someone's your friend, you don't know what they believe. You don't know them. Yeah, you trust them, but there's a reason that we don't say those things, or that we don't say things that degrade humanity, and that's because, consciously or not, you're pushing the bounds of what you consider acceptable. Societally, we've decided that these things aren't acceptable because we've come to realize that everyone is a human, and that's why we don't tend to make those jokes in public, regardless of whether they're racist, sexist jokes. We tend not to make them because we know there's something wrong with them, and we feel more comfortable making them because we trust our friends, but we can't know for sure, and we do also know that we're pushing the Overton window for what's acceptable in society and what's not.
Is it trust or is it privilege?
Well,
I think it can be both.
Remember, I hedged. The trust certainly comes from like privilege.
Yeah.
Like we're all like white guys, right? Or not all of us. But,
Wait a minute.
I wasn't referring to the table. I was referring to like the friends I'm thinking.
All of us who didn't ask the question, is it trust or privilege?
But yeah, it's certainly both, right?
Yeah. I do think that privilege plays a big role in it because you're like, well, I know it doesn't hurt any of us. Well, yeah, that's the point. That's the problem there.
Also, I don't think you're pro-context, because if you were pro-context, you take into history as a context in that situation. The context is not just limited to, I'm in this certain place with my friends. There's broader context. So I do think it is a certain kind of privilege to say, I don't have to worry about that. This is the context that I'm going to focus on because this is not harming me in any kind of way. But if someone were to pass by you, the next person we're going to get hurt by that. If you were going to say that, I said this with my friends last night, but nobody was there, so no one got hurt, no one's feelings were hurt. That is an exceeding amount of privilege. That is saying, well, because nobody right next to me is getting offended or hurt by this or degraded right now, I can continue to do this kind of behavior.
Yeah, I entirely grant that. I mean, I'm aware, like I said earlier, I recognize I'm very privileged, surrounded by these kinds of friends. We are very lefty, smart, upper middle class, right? We have things that a lot of people
Lefty.
don't have, right? But
heterosexual male.
Heterosexual male.
not fully applicable.
He's spearheading this.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Especially because I'm talking to three people who are from a different generation than I am. So this is to slightly sort of introduce maybe a subtopic of what it is that because we're talking a lot about
Subpoint A.
Subpoint A. We're talking a lot about sort of casual spoken speech, right? And you had sort of said because I'm an author, and again I'm not only an author but I'm also a creative writing professor, and so something that I think is kind of interesting that I've noticed a shift in generations is in the 1980s and 1990s there was, when we were talking about the world of the arts, there's a really big push by the American right to censor art, right? This is why this is why we introduced parental advisory explicit lyrics stickers onto CDs. It's why we had the MPAA start to have really sort of restrictive ratings on all of our films. It's why we have TVMA, whatever, that comes up on your TV when you're doing stuff. So those things weren't around prior to the 80s and 90s, and there was this really, really heavy push. And it was the American left who was very much pushing back on that and going, don't censor the arts, right? I mean, art is art. It's supposed to be challenging. It's supposed to shock people. It's supposed to, jolt you out of your complacency and make you think. And maybe sometimes it can offend or challenge your sensibilities or whatever. But it needs to exist. And what I've noticed, and this has come sort of in the form of, in my creative writing courses, my students will essentially give TVMA ratings to their own stories. And they'll submit stories where they will put explicit content, drug use, sex, blah blah blah. They weirdly never do it for violence. They hint at a lot of serial killer stories. They don't, but whenever there's sex or drug use or alcohol, they'll put a warning at the beginning of stories. And I've noticed that is a shift from one generation to the next, that there does seem to be, I think, a lot of care and precaution taken around art as potentially dangerous kinds of speech, that it's no longer what I see as sort of the American right. Well, no, I mean the American right does too, but I've now seen the American left also kind of joining that chorus and doing that, and I'm just interested to know if that is a generational thing, how it is that you guys see that, if you see sort of your friends also kind of seeing things in that same way. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that our generation cares a lot more about mental health than any of the generations that came before it, and we've come to realize, at least I think this from what I've seen, that we've all experienced various degrees of trauma of various subjects. And so putting those warnings on it isn't to be like, you know, I don't want you to read this because it might be too mature for you. It's more like, if you've experienced this, or this is something that you struggle to read, you know, this sparks a memory or something that's uncomfortable for you or is harmful for you, just so you know, it's right here. It's at the beginning. This is what's going to be in here, so maybe don't read that, but I could be wrong.
But do you feel as though the link between mental health and art is like I feel like the fact that that's your response sort of, and that you're taking it as a given, that like, of course there are things that might harm you or trigger you within art, and so therefore those warnings exist. Like, I don't know that is a given. Like, I don't know that it is objectively true that things are going to harm you mentally, that they're going to sort of like put your mental health at risk if you encounter them in art. Sans warning, or at least there's no empirical studies that suggest that's true.
I could.
Blossom looks like she has a gut.
I think I'm gonna start from your first question and then end up with that. I do think there's a link between, you know, how it was people trying to censor art, because I think art can be a kickstart for revolutions across the world. Art is usually the first place where people start like thinking and exploring ideas and being like, hey, maybe something's wrong in society.
Yeah.
So that makes sense that a lot of people try to suppress art. And then I think because it became the norm for suppressing art, we unconsciously grew up with the idea that we should label art. But then I think Rob is right, because the way that we grew up, because if we care about the reason why we try to like label things is different. So they labeled it for a different reason. We grew up with those labels, but we thought these labels should stay, but for this reason. So we are not seeing it in the sense that this art should not exist. It's more of, if you are harmed by this, I don't want to be the cause of your harm. So I think Gen Z is very much, we don't want to harm anybody by producing this art. So we're going to put a censor on this, just in case, just for your your mental health.
So I couldn't agree more that I think that it definitely is because that was the environment in which you guys grew up. But I'm interested to know where the idea that this art might harm you, and therefore we want to make sure that it doesn't. Okay.
Because I have psych minor, and I'm also like doing like video research. There's a very strong correlation that when people see like things that has happened to them, even on movies, like they would have visceral reactions. You could be PTSD. You could be like a soldier who sees a war movie and you lose your mind. So there's things like that, and I think that's what Gen Z is trying to like avoid for other people. They don't want to be the cause of the suffering.
I also think, like in my own life, one of my favorite books is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is funny because we're talking about like censorship, and that book was censored.
Right.
But for me, like I can read that book no problem. Spoilers: there's suicide in that book. But the movie, I could not like. We watched it in class, and I had to leave the classroom.
It's a tough watch.
Yeah, I could not see that just from my own personal experiences. I couldn't watch that happen. So it's not empirical, really. It's more of like a personal story. But there are things like that I know in like even things that my generation loves to watch, like shows. I know I can't watch them because of the experiences I've had.
I recently read White Sargasso Sea. I don't know if anyone's read that, but it's supposed to be an adaptation of Jane Eyre, and there was like a very wide amount of racial slurs used. And I remember like it's like To Kill a Mockingbird. Every time I would read it, I'd be like, it would be a grating. I'm not bothered by it. I know the time period it was created. I understand why it's in the book in different contexts. But at the same time, it still does something. Yeah. It still triggers something.
Sure.
And so I think when people put censorships in, like, I don't think it's censorship. I think
warnings.
when they put labels or warnings in the book, or an art gallery, I don't think it's to suppress the art. It's more to tell you, maybe it's not for you.
Kind of postulate like why that phenomenon may have started in the first place. I mean, this is like a pretty like Western American thing, given my understanding of it. It comes from a point of privilege that we don't experience like literal like violence as often as we used to.
Speak for
especially
yourself.
like, well, yeah, I'm speaking for like, people with like my privilege, right?
Yeah.
But even like, as time has gone on, there's been a trend, even if it's different, right? away from violence, and so we don't experience that as much, but we're experiencing more and more acutely aware because of like psychological research, like these mental stressors, and that's what poses more of a risk, especially to Gen Z today, than violence on the whole, as opposed to how it may have used to.
I think it's almost exactly the opposite.
Really?
Like maybe you don't experience it on a personal level, but you see it everywhere all the time. You're constantly bombarded with there's this war happening in this country and there's this
I'm referring
genocide
specifically to the American context.
Yeah,
like that's where these labels are coming from.
I'm just saying, like what I think is happening is that we do experience it on a wider scale where you're constantly bombarded every day with XYZ tragic, violent event that's happening. And so we just want to like, as part of it, we want to create our little bubbles where, you know, maybe you don't want to experience that.
But this is really interesting because this is, I think, getting to the heart of what we're talking about. Because I think Peyton's point is you're not actually experiencing it. And you're going, we are experiencing it, but you're not, right? Like you're experiencing it through media. Like you're inundated with it because you're being exposed to it. And I think that that's the sort of like the sort of concept creep that we're talking about here, right? Where it's like, encountering something in art or in media, the sort of shift from seeing that as like I'm a sort of voyeur, right? I'm a sort of audience member, and I'm seeing this happening, or I'm reading about this thing happening, versus when I encounter it, I'm experiencing that, right? Which is sort of like where your mind immediately went. Well, of course we're experiencing violence. We see it all the time.
Well,
but like, are you experiencing it if you're seeing, like, you know what I mean? And that's what we're talking about, right?
To maybe connect this back to the whole like suppressing free speech thing, it's something that we all know is we have those people that come on the campus and they shout at, you know, women that like you should be raped, basically.
Yeah, they're terrible.
Yeah, they're terrible. And I feel like everyone here agrees that they shouldn't be on the campus in the first place.
1,000%.
Now, if in the same way that someone who has experienced personal violence against themselves may not want to witness violence in a piece of media they're choosing to consume, the same way a university student who may have been sexually assaulted can feel just as oppressed, just as assaulted by the presence of someone telling them that they should be sexually assaulted.
Yeah. But I think that's. I think seeing news about, for instance, the war in Gaza is distinctly different.
Yeah,
or reading something in your class is distinctly different than, even though the person's not physically assaulting you, a guy who is like standing a foot away from you and pointing to the things you're wearing and saying that is calls for you to be assaulted. Like that I think actually is an assault. Like I mean that like I actually would argue that's a very clear verbal assault, and that's it's not just what he's saying. It's the proximity. It's a direct attack, right? So this is all to say I'm not trying to sort of make an argument against trigger. I give content warnings to my students all the time. I think they're incredibly important, but I am just trying to point out that I think there was a shift in the way that the concept of art as potentially dangerous definitely, I think, started to carry over from a sort of Christian right, sort of Bible thumping kind of thing in the sort of mid 20th century, and pretty much every single century prior to that,
I agree.
until the last like 20 years, where it has, I think, started to bleed out. And I think that there's certainly a lot of great intentions for that, but I do sometimes get a little bit concerned that at least my students as artists are maybe sometimes holding back. Yeah. And I think, you know, Do the Right Thing, one of the greatest films of all time, Spike Lee ends that film with an incredibly brutal act of violence.
Yeah.
Spike Lee is speaking as a Black American trying to make this movie about the violence that happens to Black Americans. And we would all be at a loss if he felt as though he had to sort of hold back, even if it were for good intentions, from making that film because he didn't want to necessarily have a sort of art as danger. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that make sense to what you were saying before, Lawson? Because I totally agree with your point, especially as a psych major. Does that sort of like land
Psych
on your
minor.
ears? Psych minor, sorry. But as a psych minor, does that sort of land on your ears? And does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. I think that I agree with you that there is, like, how much is too much? Like, are we restricting it too much that artists themselves feel constrained? I don't want to live in a world where there is no more, like, free artists.
Yeah,
sure.
But at the same time, I've come to realize that everything we do and say can be potentially dangerous. So how, like, what is the limit?
Yeah.
Do we limit the artist, or do we limit the art? Do we limit the words? Or it's like, where is the limit for all of this?
Right.
Well, like a good place to start is like, well, what is the potential danger, right? I mean, there are a lot of obvious answers, like inciting violence, like mental health struggles, I don't know, restricting people like economically, socially. What are like
I think
other
all of those,
categories that I'm missing?
I don't know. Yeah, go on.
Well, no, just to that. Like, I'll ask you a question too, everybody, off of that, because there's one point that I made before that I think we didn't fully address that I'm actually just genuinely curious about. Why, like, do you guys feel as though there's a reason why it is that, for instance, like students in creative art classes, or and when I go see the BFA films at the end of the year, every single year, Magic Hour and Jimmy Widescreen, you should all go see it. I'll put a plug in for it. It's so great. But I see students much more apt to write about or create art that has violence in it than sex.
Probably just because the way that we grew up.
Yeah, so that's my question is like, so like into the area of like what do we censor? Where do we start? I'm curious as to why it is that it seems as though that category seems to feel more dangerous to this generation than does actual out and out violence and like just straight up like I mean I'm talking people writing about serial killers and shit in the class. They have no problem with that and like no content warning that they'll even give at the beginning.
Yeah.
But if it's like consensual sex that's being had on page 7, it's like content warning, and I'm like, wow, that is fucking wild. So I'm interested to know.
I think that it's part of what I was talking about earlier, and part of what Robert mentioned is there's constant like not direct exposure, but like indirect bombardment via like media, games, the news, whatever it is, and we just haven't experienced it as much. Again, privileged position, I understand that. But
you haven't
it's
experienced
like,
sex as much?
No, I'm talking about violence. I'm talking about violence. Okay.
But your generation hasn't. I mean, statistically, that's the thing. Is that like
in America, like the people, like our generation, like contextually us, right? We have experienced less, but we've been desensitized to the idea of it because it's been like advertised to us so much. I
feel like it has. Oh, sorry. No.
I think it's much harder to make like tangibly real as opposed to like maybe sex. Somebody's like, oh my God, I might have that one day, as opposed to I might not get shot one day. You know. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, Blossom, good.
I was just going to say, yes, one, you're desensitized. Two, I see it, I think you guys see it as fantasy.
Exactly.
Whereas sex is, I guess in your society, very real, very like tangible. But like violence and on that scale is more like, look what
tangible
this person,
for some people.
look what this person did in this era that we will never get to see again, and in this country that we are not a part of, but we can watch on the news. And
exactly.
so it's more like a fantasy like realm that they're exploring because it's not in their society as much. It's not like I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna see a masculine right now.
Right.
So for them, I think that's why you're seeing it in your class, especially creative writing. That's a genre that is getting pushed out in the public a lot.
Right.
I do think that it has a lot to do with the upbringing. Most of the people that I know were raised in Christian households, very Christian households, where, like, in some cases
murder
they weren't
was
even
okay, but
yeah, exactly. Like they would watch true crime shows all the time, or they would watch John Wick, but they weren't allowed to watch, the Little Mermaid, I think, whatever the cartoon is. They weren't allowed to watch that because obviously like her midriff is showing, and that's like unchristian. And most of the people I know grew up in a religious household of some sort. I mean, it's Tucson, And I feel like that has a big part to play.
So, okay, this is great. So, this, I promise this is still talking about free speech. So this is interesting, though, because I think that there, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think there's a sort of generational change, because I think, as you guys pointed out, I think accurately before, you grew up in an environment where a lot of those sort of advisory labels were on these things. But again, I think that in past generations, and I'll include my own in that, our response to our parents, going, "Oh yeah, don't watch those things," wasn't, "Okay, then I'm going to internalize that and then get to school, become an artist, and also."
I think you internalized it in a different way.
I think. Oh, okay, great. Let's hear that.
But
do you get the other half of what I'm about
I get
to say?
exactly what you're saying.
That we kind of were let's go find as many Playboys as we can, and and make out under the bleacher. We were very much not going, this is something to be scared of, so I got to be scared of it. But go, yeah.
I feel like from my knowledge of like religious experiences in particular, this relates, I promise. If someone grows up in a hyper religious family, say they're a super Mormon family, they're instructed in Mormonism their whole life, there's usually two things that happen. Then there's not really a moderate reaction to that, right? Either they leave and they kind of become this kind of hyper anti-Mormon atheist, sometimes hypersexual. With that, hypersexuality is a reaction against normative sexuality, right? In the same way that conformity can also be a reaction to it. You're reacting to the education that you were brought into, and you're saying maybe there's something right about this. So people who grow up Christian but maybe aren't Christian when they're in adulthood, maybe they still hold on to some of those Christian tenets, I should be putting advisory labels, or maybe I feel a little bad. It's that Christian guilt concept. Maybe I feel a little bad about putting sex scenes or whatever in my book. I feel like those are both reactions. So both of our generations internalized our upbringings, and we internalized the societal expectations. We just internalized them in different ways.
But why did you internalize it differently? That's my question. Because of course, yeah.
With the rise of the internet, especially in our generation, our reactions are definitely going to be different.
Yeah.
So even if I want to, for instance, leave the Christian community, I'm going to open my phone and see a Christian influencer every 5 seconds. And that's going to reinforce all of the ideals and shame and guilt.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be well, maybe I shouldn't wear this shirt right now.
Yeah. It's very potent.
So I'm going to have my friends around me who are going to also say, I saw you
Tribe life
online.
culture.
Yeah. And wow, that's an interesting outfit you wore. Even if I try to separate myself from the community is going to pull me back in because they're all around me. I can't hide from them anymore.
Shit, that's blowing my mind.
Yeah.
That's so true. I didn't even think about that.
So you guys can be I'm going to be radical. I'm going to leave town and I'm never going to look back, and that's it.
Yeah, you
Bye,
had that
folks.
option.
You had that option.
Yeah. Also with talking about that, with making porn even back then, you could be a porn star and nobody would know. You would just be in the back of a porn shop. But now you do it once and everyone knows, and that's never leaving you. And it's the same with everything. And in that way, I feel all these moral standards that were set, Christianity has truly become a universalizing religion in that you cannot escape it.
So this is bring us back to our question, which is the whole free speech thing. With the advent of the internet, I mean, where does that leave the next few generations?
Should we restrict minors' access to the internet?
But I mean, where does that leave the next few generations? Because the internet is, it has democratized speech, right? It has democratized information. It's let everybody have a megaphone, and to do so, without any real censorship, which is great or not great depending on where you fall. So what is that going to look like with the app? How do you guys yes, you're reinforced with more and more Christian influencers, but you also can very easily get exposed to some pretty wild stuff on the internet. So what happens there?
I think that's the dichotomy that you see in a lot of Gen Z, is that if you want to be liberal or whatever, conservative, you're reinforced with whatever background you grew up with. And then you see conflicting things on your phone, Instagram, whatever, Twitter. And so you're constantly having all of these ideals coming at you at the same time. Yeah. The only thing that's going to get reinforced is the one you already know, because that's the easiest to stick to you first. Yeah. So that's one solid layer. And then you can start, okay, I'm going to deconstruct. I don't want to believe this. So the next best thing, or the next thing that you already have, maybe your friends in college, or the information that you get through. So that's another layer that's going to come there. And those things will continue to battle. So that's why you just create this complex human being who's neither here or there.
Well, I think I can even simplify that into just the word experience, right? Like we can be exposed to so many different things online, and let's say when you're 18, you grow up Christian conservative, right? And you see Charlie Kirk, you see Steven Crowder, and you're like, wow, this all agrees with my family, my
you
upbringing.
picked literally the worst.
The two worst fucking people on the
I did it
planet.
on purpose, but yeah, that's at that point in your life, that is your experience is building up to that being more reinforced. But let's say you meet a friend in college who's kind of lefty and pretty
Stop
based.
saying that term.
What? It's my lingo, as the kids say. But nonetheless, there's an exposure, an experience that you have that is very proximate, very intimate, not as abstracted away as all these things on the internet. But then if you have more of those little pieces of grounded, actual exposure to things, then your algorithms might start changing a little bit as you personally change, and it's all experiential. And so I think to kind of bring it around to how do we deal with speech on the internet, it's such a wide thing. There's so many things you're going to get inundated. What we should focus on is the real lived experiences, such that when those people engage with the internet moving forward, they have our experiences, our ideas that we've shared with them to kind of internalize as they go there.
Go on.
I was going to say the same thing about experience. I love when you say such that, because my mind just immediately visualizes you as a piece of paper with words on it.
Yeah, you should read my essays.
Yeah, you talk in essay format. It's great. But yeah, the experience thing is important, because I feel like it's not as doomer as everyone thinks, where it's the youth are screwed, all the internet and everything.
Totally agree.
Because at the end of the day, we're talking about it. It's not that we're not cognizant of what's happening, and we're not the only 4 people in the world that are cognizant of what's happening. And like Peyton just said, real lived experiences will always trump the internet for most people. I mean, obviously there will be people the person you used in the AI example we had in that debate. Obviously, the real lived experiences did not win out in that circumstance, but for 99% of people, I think what matters is the real lived experience. We all recognize, I think, that art is speech and speech is potent, but there's nothing more potent than that speech happening, like you were arguing earlier, with proximity or with something that's real. Seeing something on the internet is not as potent as someone a foot away from you saying something to you.
Also, I think we've talked about art, we've talked about social, but we're still missing politics. I think we can start looking to politicians to be examples of what free speech, even in debate, should look like. I think they have modeled what they should be representing. And I think that...
You think it should be our models?
No, I said they've modeled it. They've mudded what they should be representing.
Yeah.
They've taken the idea of free speech and they've broken it down. Especially when you can't watch debates anymore and think that you're getting anything out of it.
They killed the Pope.
But I mean, that's that goes at least as far back as the Kennedy-Nixon debate, where sort of famously people who watched the debate thought that Kennedy won, and people who listened to it thought that Nixon won because Kennedy's a better-looking guy, right? And that was the end of it all, right? I mean, that was so clearly what the debate became theater, and it became about sort of whatever the performative thing was. And so, I mean, that's I think our politicians certainly, I think Obama was the first candidate who used social media as a sort of force for trying to get elected. But it was very early on. It was in an entirely positive way. Yeah. There wasn't let's use social media to spread disinformation or to mudsling. It was just let's get more visibility and sort of get a viral campaign going kind of thing. It wasn't really until 2016 when there was, I think, a much nastier version of using social media. So, certainly, I think our more recent politicians have muddied it in the exactly way you're talking about, Blossom. But I don't even know if that's even free speech that is the thing that they've muddied, as much as it's just the concept of communicating with people and taking shit seriously. which is that's a whole other.
I feel like
that's a whole other bean to count.
I hate you. Damn. I feel like another thing to talk about with politics is what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about jokes and pushing the boundary of what's acceptable to say. In politics, in 2012, half the things that are being said now in 2025 would not be even something to say. But now you can't get elected without saying certain things. You can't be elected without almost seeming like you're, I'm not a politician, I'm just a regular guy. And by regular guy, I mean I'm kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
That feels like something when we talk about restricting free speech. Should there be restrictions on our politicians not acting like educated individuals?
That's what I was actually pointing out. Yeah.
I got you. Don't worry.
So how would that look? What does that restriction look like? That you have to have a certain amount of erudition to?
I think it's impossible to do it legally. It would have to be a cultural shift.
But it's also an etiquette that
revolution.
they used to have.
Yeah.
It was an etiquette. Even if it wasn't legal, it was a social etiquette that they knew that they had to abide by. It was a constraint that they had put on themselves. And they've removed that constraint. I think it's time to if we have top down constraints reinforced, maybe we would have a more civil society where free speech is not necessarily attacked or any one side is feeling we are doomed. Oh my God, I can't say this anymore. Because etiquette must be reinforced top down.
I feel like it's almost
or bottom up, whichever way you want to see it.
I feel like it should be bottom up. If I think if moderators for for the presidential debates as an example, right? The moderators whenever they try to stop anyone from speaking, despite that being their job, they will get for when they had to stop Donald Trump because he would go on his tangents, then the media would be they're trying to censor him. What if we just let them run themselves ragged and then they lost the election? Then politicians, if they just started to lose the elections for acting the way that they're acting, from talking the way that they're talking, if they started to lose, they would change their tactics. That's how we got here in the first place, is because they started to win.
Well, I mean, so two things to that. One, it doesn't help that the lead up to every debate, the media itself is countdown to the showdown, the cage match, blah, blah, blah. And you're it is two 80-year-old fucking guys who are getting up at 3 a.m. to piss themselves. This is not, the UFC. So that's one thing. I think it's the media is very much part of that. Definitely. It's not just the politicians. But also, I mean, this is where the question comes in, I think, to what you're saying, Robert. And maybe, Bless, we have a sort of different perspective because you're coming at it from an international perspective. Mm-hmm. Because it's I always hear this thing of if only we had politicians who were as good as the American people. And I'm the problem is that we do, right? That's the issue. Because it's why can't they just be more civil? And it's well, they have to do this because they get more clicks and they get more views. It's well, if they're getting more clicks and more views, they're getting more clicks and more views because that's what people want to see. So why are people calling on them for something? So it's this chicken and the egg thing of, okay, are they getting more views because people want that? And would we be able to get better candidates if they were more civil, or would that person just end up falling by the wayside? I
think that people react most to what stirs their emotions the most, and hatred and anger is a much more powerful emotion than liking something. So I feel when they go out and they throw out all that rhetoric that makes you frustrated, makes you angry. I feel the whole point of the news, Fox News, CNN, is to make you frustrated, and you interact more with that, or you watch it more, because it's, for me at least, it's more potent. Maybe it's different for different people. I don't feel our politicians are as good as the American people. I feel our politicians are as good as the system that they live in, and I don't think that you can say the modern American people constructed that system. All we do is we're presented two choices between often equally bad people, and we have to say, I have to do this ritual of deciding which bad I want.
But why are we presented with those two choices?
Because that's the system that we live under.
But why is that the system that we live under?
Nepotism, capitalism.
Yeah.
All the isms.
Yeah, all the isms.
I don't. I guess I only partly agree with that. I mean, I certainly don't agree that liking something by definition is less potent than hating something. I mean, not again to turn to Obama, but I mean, Obama's entire campaign was hope and change, right? Like, that was like the whole entire thing was a very optimistic campaign, and it was very much about like, let's change to sort of like look toward, come together to look towards tomorrow, right? Like that was very much it was an emotional campaign.
I do think that's a flawed example, because Mitt Romney's campaign, for example, was not based on hate. It was also based on hope and based on liking things. So it was basically whose hopeful campaign was better than the others. And if there's one thing that like liberalism can do better than conservatism, it's the hope argument.
Well, so I patently reject your response. I mean, Obama ran against McCain in 2008, and McCain's running mate was Sarah Palin, who was going out to every single one of these rallies and saying that Obama was a terrorist, and yeah, go ahead.
I would say the era of like the time period that Obama was in called for that kind of thing. There was a lot of sentiment. Like people were sad. There was just like 2003, 9/11, and then there was the Great Depression, and there was all of those things. People were looking for that kind of message,
for sure,
for hope. If he had run that kind of campaign now, I fear that maybe it wouldn't have the same effect.
Well, I want to alter your framework a little bit. Instead of like liking versus like hating things, getting angry, maybe it's the risk of like gaining something versus losing what you already have.
That's better.
That's better. Contextualizing that makes more sense, because like the left, we are very good at recognizing there are so many things that we don't have, things that we still need, that we need to work towards getting, right? Rights, better wages, all these kinds of things. Whereas maybe, in my understanding, more conservative demographics we're going to lose money. We're going to have to pay more taxes. We're going to be restricted in like what we're able to say or joke about.
I feel like the Trump populist campaign did run on like, we have so much to gain. Like the whole "Make America Great Again" thing is about gaining things, not about what we have
would
to
have
lose.
been lost if we stayed with
the
Biden.
again is the negative part.
Well,
right?
Everything
is shit.
The whole point of populism is to run on like the basis of getting as many people, appealing to as broad of a base, the common people, as possible. No one can say that Trump doesn't do that. And the way that he does that, yes, is by saying like, oh, it's all the immigrants' fault and the trans people's fault. But he also says things like, oh, we need to like gain more money for the rural people. We need to gain more rights for blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter if he actually does that. It's just what he says.
I think that I can see both your points, but I think it comes down to what do the people want to hear and what they need. They need, in this kind of climate and context, they want someone to blame for why they are suffering and how they're suffering, and he does that well.
I wonder who else did that.
But why, Blossom? Just to go back to what you said before, why do you see? I mean, the context under leading up to 2008. As you said, we had the Great Recession, we had the Iraq War. I mean, people were also very angry and very upset and wanted someone to blame then too. So I'm interested to know why it is that you feel like, well, that was a time that called for hope and change and sort of looking forward to the future, and like the context now looks for people to blame. Like both of those are like pretty scary times where you could get the American people to get really pissed off and want someone to blame, or you could get the American people to come together and go, let's solve this problem. I don't know that Obama's campaign wouldn't be successful now.
It might be, because Obama, I think, is a great orator, first of all.
Yeah.
He's a great speaker. So I do think that he would be successful regardless. But I'm saying, for now, I don't know if that exact campaign would have the same results. Because I feel like the world was in like a place of mourning with the American people. Like people were feeling for the American people. What people needed at that point in time was not someone to say, let's point fingers, because the entire world wasn't pointing fingers. Everybody was like, I remember sitting down in my house and being like, damn, they look so sad. And I'm like 6 years old, and I was like, wow.
So is mine.
So you see, it wasn't like what people were looking for was for someone to say, we can still rise after this. Like, this is not the end of the world. That's why I say that campaign was so successful, because it made everybody across the globe be like, yeah, you guys can still do it. Let's go. Like, you're the underdogs.
I also feel like we did point fingers in a way, but it was
subtle.
I feel like it was like the whole point is now there's so many different people that could be blamed, right? Like the politicians are like, it's immigrants, it's blah, blah, blah. And then the left is like, it's billionaires, blah, blah, blah. But back then,
I wish that was what the left was saying. I don't know that they are, but good.
I mean, very successful rallies all over the country right now are showing that that's exactly what the left is saying.
I think Bernie and AOC, yeah.
Yeah, the Democrats aren't left, so.
Yeah, okay, got it.
But yeah, for back then, I say like it was forever ago. There was a very clear enemy. It wasn't internal. It was external. Is that what you were gonna say?
Kind of. Like in Obama's presidency, right? Like there were a shit ton of real, tangible like losses that like there wasn't much to lose after that. Like terrorist attack here, housing crash, like it's bad. It's a lot worse. As opposed to in 2016 through to 2020, sure there are lots of like losses and bad things, but I feel like again, it's kind of to your point of there's so many things we could blame, but there's also like, what are we talking about? Like it's so amorphous to where like
amorphous.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys were on the rise. Like when they say terrible time, like hard times create like good people. Or, like,
I hate
that stupid
that quote so much.
But it is sometimes it does play like true. That you guys were going through tough times, and then there came this hero, and then
I need a hero.
But problem, like crisis averted.
Copyright.
There comes this like charismatic person to just carry the people forward on that high.
But I think that's my main point, and we can kind of lasso this back into free speech, because like I think all I'm pointing at is I think it's giving maybe too much credit to Donald Trump, not enough credit to Obama to say that it was just sort of the moment that they rose out of. I think that any of these sort of disastrous moments can be either really exploited and taken advantage of, or they can be seen as an opportunity by people who have the right intentions and are great orators, right? And so I think if we go back to sort of like political speech, is the sort of litmus test of what restrictions we're putting on? Is it just like, if you're one of those exploitative people, we try to sort of like have a better kind of filter system for figuring out, who the con artists are versus who the people who have sort of like genuine good intentions, and how do we create that litmus test? Yeah,
then it comes down to like who's deciding what's exploitative or what side is exploitative, and I don't think that there's a way to do that legalistically.
Oh, I'm not talking about legally. I think because you guys said socially, you said we have to do it as
I think that socially it just requires a collective consciousness, a class consciousness, one might even call it. And I think that we're arriving to that point where we're kind of getting fed up with hearing certain things or hearing things being talked about. And I think that the rhetoric that's being used by Donald Trump, because I don't give him that much credit, I think that it was a very simple thing that he did. To exploit the things that he exploited. It was
a
very
simple man.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like it's biting him in the ass right now, right? Like he says it's all of these problems. The country's not getting better though; it's getting worse. And the fact is that people are noticing that.
You see Senator Kennedy, who was like,
Yeah.
He's the dog that caught the car, and now he's just got to figure out what to do with it. It's like, that's not what that idiom means, you know? Like,
yeah. I would say, like, it still comes down for me, personally, with etiquette. I think that there will be some people who cannot fit that etiquette that we require in society. And if you cannot fit it, you don't belong in that office. That's the first thing. So yeah, it's like there's just simple etiquette. There's like simple.
They're gonna pull us off of Spotify.
So for me, I think that because we cannot be absolute judges of character, nobody in society is gonna be a great judge of like a person's motivation. You can only like judge for yourself, but you cannot judge for, like the next person or like things like that. But what we can demand as society is for people to be conscious of the way that they present speeches and all of those things. Even if you're a politician or like at the very grassroots level, is that we can demand that people be at least civil.
And I'll say I want to just reference, you had said this before, Robert, about your generation, the internet, and sort of like the way that you're sort of all conscious of that. I will say, like, I have, like, there's nothing that will like give you more hope for like what the rest of the next few generations are going to be than spending all of your time. I spend way too much time with Gen Z. Like, I mean, like I spend more time with Gen Z than I spend with my own wife. I'm always around you guys, and I've never seen just like across the board more thoughtful, like considerate people. And I think it's because, as you said before, Blossom, like because you're so inundated constantly with like thoughts and ideas and ideologies and all these sort of like conflicting things, like you have no choice but to become like really critically thoughtful people, even if like I think like the least thoughtful member of Gen Z is like more thoughtful than most other generations because like you just have to think about this shit. So I think that like that gives me hope for this concept of like a societal free speech that has reasonable restrictions because you're just getting fed up and you're just like, fuck it, like we're just over it, you know?
All right, I think
We're looking at time. Is that?
I think that is
Sorry,
time
am I
to-
talking too long?
We should
No,
all
you're fine.
give one closing sentence, I think, and then we close it out. So Peyton.
I feel like my speech about how hopeful I am is the
That's-
perfect way to
that's
end
that's
this thing.
perfect.
But
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to kind of sum up, like what should the restrictions be? And with like the internet, with politics, all these, I'm gonna say it, fun, goofy things that we have to account for, right? I think what it boils down to is the immediacy, the experience, the extent to which like people can be hurt, right? And there's so many different ways that people can be hurt. And it depends on, whether it's online, whether it's in person, whether or not it leads to action. But socially, we should all just be more critical of, okay, if what I say or what this person says could lead to more harm, could lead to some bad action, I probably shouldn't say that, right? I think that's what it boils down to is the experience.
Blossom.
Yeah, I would agree. I definitely do think that there is no such thing as absolute free speech. I don't think there's anything as absolute freedom. So when people are calling for these things, you have to really check yourself and what's your motivation behind this kind of things. And is it free speech that only benefits you? And are you are you going to restrict other kinds of free speech? Because when I hear people calling, we don't have free speech anymore, I'm like, really? You don't? Who says that? And why? But then I see those same people saying, you shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
And you can't say that, or you shouldn't protest, you shouldn't write that. So it's what is your true motivation behind calling for these things? And maybe when you sit down, you should be happy with what you have. You should really reassess what it is that you're calling for to be free.
I would say my closing thought is sometimes some things happen and we're so back.
Nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
Until it does.
My last thought I'll say off of Blossoms is, it's telling that the people who are always saying that you can't say anything anymore are the people who can't shut the fuck up about it. So yeah, I think free speech is fine. I think that restrictions are reasonable. I just think that you guys gotta back the fuck off of art a little bit more and let artists do their thing. But otherwise, yeah, let's restrict where necessary. But you guys, I think it's good that I'm here. I note that even though all three of you are going to be involved in it, you completely forgot to plug our event, and for some reason you're doing it on the back.
Oh
end.
no!
Because-
I said at the
That's
beginning
yeah.
because we upload these every Friday, and it's next Tuesday. So the event will be finished by the time this video gets uploaded.
Wasn't that a great event that we did?
That was an
Yes.
amazing event.
So
It was so
Wow.
good. Wow.
Such good stuff.
Me and
I-
Blossom
yeah.
absolutely crushed them, and Bella. We just destroyed them.
Destroyed
Rest in
them.
peace, Logan.
Yeah.
I was up there and I looked pretty the whole time.
Yeah.
Okay, this is not about you.
Well, thank you guys for having me as the guest, and sorry, Logan, to bump you, to kick you off.
No, it's all
He'll
good.
live.
Yeah. Great episode. I think this might be the longest episode.
It
in
is. It
Discourse
beats
Debrief
mine
history.
by 10 minutes. So it is
Yeah.
officially the longest
Yeah, my
episode.
bad. My
But,
bad.
no, thank you.
No,
Great
holy
conversation.
yeah.
All kinds
This
of
is fun.
different things. Holy app on behalf of
Behard.
on behalf of all of us. Behard. But yeah, thank you so much for watching episode.
10.
No, it's not 10.
Last
10
one was
was
9.
Last one was 10.
Last one was 10.
We're on the penultimate episode, or maybe the third to last.
The third, would that be Tri-Ultimate?
Try ultimate. Sure, let's call it
Awesome.
that.
One of the latter episodes of this season, but nonetheless,
Yeah.
former latter.
Thank you for having me on, and yeah, I don't know how you usually close it.
Robert
Ewan
Martin.
Blossom?
Ted.
and Peyton. Thank you all. We'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.
Always on my mind, all the